I know simple thought, born almost as a joke, led me to question everything I thought was stable in my life. My name is Julia, and I am 35 years old. I've been married to Andrea for almost 10 years, a sweet and loving man. However, lately our relationship seemed to be stuck in the rut. Not that there was a lack of love, but the passion had faded, and I was looking for something to rekindle that spark that had united us so strongly. One day, while I was on the phone with my younger sister Elena, a bold thought came to my mind. Elena, in her 30s, had always been more carefree and confident, and her free approach to life fascinated me. As we talked, my mind wandered, and almost without thinking, I imagined what it would mean to introduce a third person into our intimacy. What if that person had been Elena? What would Andrea and Elena have thought? I dismissed the idea immediately, but the curiosity remained there, creeping into my thoughts. A few evenings later, Andrea and I were having dinner. I felt like I needed to share my thoughts with him, but I didn't know how to do it without sounding crazy. So I began cautiously. Love, what do you think about couples trying out new things like threesome fantasy? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Andrea looked up curiously. It depends. Is this something you've ever thought about? He replied, sipping his wine. I couldn't believe we were having that conversation. Yes, but not seriously. I was just wondering if it could spice up our intimacy. He seemed to be thinking about it. It's an interesting fantasy, but who are you thinking of doing it with? My heart raced. It was time to throw that idea out, with someone we trust, like Elena. Andrea opened his eyes wide but said nothing. His reaction left me in suspense. Over the next few days, the idea hung between us. Andrea seemed to think about it, but we hadn't looked into the matter further. I wondered if I had exaggerated, but one evening, while we were on the sofa, Andrea surprised me. Are you sure Elena would agree? He asked me, breaking the silence. I didn't expect that direct question. I don't know, I admitted, but I can talk to her if you think it's a possibility. He nodded slowly. It's a fantasy I might consider, but it depends on how she takes it. The fact that Andrea was open to the proposal gave me courage. Now I had to face Elena. I met her for coffee. She was my younger sister, but we were very close. Talking about something so intimate made me uncomfortable, but I knew Elena wasn't the type to judge. So, there's something I need to talk to you about, I began, blushing. I slowly explained the situation to her, choosing each word carefully. Elena looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Wait, are you asking me to have a threesome with you and Andrea? He asked, holding back a laugh. Yes, well, only if you feel comfortable, I replied sheepishly. Elena smiled. Julia, you are incredible. I would never have imagined a proposal like this, but I must admit that the idea intrigues me. We talked for hours about how this experience would work. It was important to establish rules. No one should feel excluded or left aside, and everything had to be consensual. I don't want this to ruin our relationship as sisters, I told Elena. She reassured me, promising that she would respect every limit. When I returned home, I told Andrea everything. He seemed relieved that Elena agreed, but he was also visibly nervous. The truth was, despite my enthusiasm, I too felt some anxiety. Was it really the right choice? Over the next few days, the decision we had made began to weigh on me. It was all too surreal, and my mind was filled with doubts. What if Andrea saw Elena differently after all this? What if Elena becomes too fond of Andrea? And me? How would I have felt seeing my husband and sister together? Elena seemed calm, almost amused by the whole situation. He called me one evening to tell me that he was preparing for the experience and that he had even bought some new lingerie. His words made me feel even more insecure. It wasn't jealousy, but a sense of loss of control. Andrea, on the other hand, was a mixture of enthusiasm and tension. I watched him in the evenings while he worked on the computer or watched TV, and every now and then I wondered if I had made a mistake. It was as if I had opened a door that could no longer be closed. One evening, while we were in bed, I decided to talk to him about it openly. "Andrea, are you sure this is a good idea? I don't want there to be any negative consequences for us." He took my hand and looked me in the eyes. "Julia, I love you. This will never change. I only want to do it because I think it can be an experience we share, not because I'm looking for something different from you." Those words reassured me, but a little voice in my head kept repeating that I was playing with fire. Despite my doubts, we began planning the evening. Elena proposed to do everything at our house, since it was a familiar and comfortable place for everyone. He also suggested having a dinner together to break the ice. "I don't want it to sound mechanical or weird," Elena said during a call. "It has to be natural, like we're just spending time together." Andrea and I discussed the details for hours. We decided that we would prepare a relaxed atmosphere, soft lights, pleasant music, and a good wine to help us feel more at ease. Even choosing the dinner menu became a meticulous operation. We opted for light but tasty dishes, avoiding too heavy foods that could ruin the mood. Lucia arrived the evening before to help me with the preparations. As I set up the room, I couldn't help but observe it. It was amazing how different we were. Me, always reserved and attentive, while she radiated confidence and a natural sensuality that seemed impossible to ignore. I wondered if Paolo had ever noticed these differences between us and what he might think. "Emma, relax," Lucia said, sensing my nervousness. "It will all be fine. We're adults. We know what we're doing." I tried to breathe deeply, but the tension grew inside me. What would you have done? Would you have faced such a delicate situation, or would you have stopped to avoid risks? Write to me in the comments. The long-awaited evening arrived. Lucia showed up on time, wearing an elegant black dress, provocative, without being excessive. I had chosen something more sober, seeking a balance between sensuality and discretion. Paolo, on the other hand, was visibly nervous, but he tried to hide it behind a smile. Dinner began in a seemingly normal way. I talked about work. Lucia told a funny anecdote about a recent trip, and Paolo tried to keep the conversation flowing. However, the air was filled with a palpable, almost tangible tension. Every laugh seemed a little more forced than usual. Every glance lasted a moment too long. Halfway through dinner, Lucia began to flirt with Paolo in a playful way. It was something subtle, but I couldn't help but notice it. She complimented him on his shirt, and he responded with a sheepish smile, a light blush appearing on his cheeks. I felt a surge of annoyance rise up, but I tried to push it back, reminding myself that it was all part of the plan. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Lucia offered to open a bottle of red wine, and I took the opportunity to go to the kitchen to get glasses. As I stood there, I took a deep breath. Was this really what I wanted? I felt like I was walking on a thin tightrope, with each step taking me closer to the abyss. I returned to the living room and found Lucia and Paolo laughing together. They seemed so comfortable, almost too comfortable. I sat next to Paolo, taking his hand to feel physical contact, as if to remember that he was mine. Lucia noticed the gesture and smiled. "Emma, are you sure you want to go through with this? There is no obligation. We can stop here," said Lucia with disarming calm. His question caught me off guard. For a moment, I realized that I still had the power to stop everything, to go back. But my curiosity, the desire to explore something new, and my trust in Paolo pushed me to respond with a nod. Paolo seemed tense, but did not object. Lucia, on the other hand, appeared perfectly at ease. "Good," he said, with a mischievous smile. "Then let's see where the evening takes us." The soft lights, the wine, and the relaxed atmosphere created a context that broke down the last barriers. I felt that something was about to change permanently, and I wasn't sure I was ready. The tension in the room was almost palpable. Every movement seemed full of hidden meaning. With her natural ease, Lucia approached Paolo, placing a hand on his shoulder as he laughed at a joke he had just made. I remained motionless, as a spectator of a scene in which I was both protagonist and antagonist. Paolo glanced at me, searching my eyes for a sign of approval. He didn't want to do anything to make me feel uncomfortable. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I stretched out my hand towards Lucia, inviting her to sit next to us on the sofa. The wine had now dissolved the last traces of shyness. Lucia, with her usual lightness, turned towards me. "Emma, are you really sure? I don't want you to feel left out or in trouble," she said. His words struck me, but they also gave me the courage to respond. "Yes, Lucia, I want it, but I want to make it clear. This is just an experiment. Nothing needs to change between us." Lucia nodded, coming over to hug me. It was a gesture of reassurance, but it made me feel incredibly vulnerable at the time. Then he turned towards Paolo, who still seemed stiff. Lucia took her glass of wine and with an amused smile told him, "Paolo, relax. It's not a business meeting." That comment broke the tension, and we all burst out laughing. Laughter served to break down the last emotional and mental barriers that separated us. Lucia approached Paolo, placing a hand on his knee. It was a seemingly innocent gesture, but it contained a clear invitation. I watched myself trying to repress a sense of jealousy that mixed with excitement. I decided to take action so as not to feel excluded. I approached Paolo and kissed his neck, a gesture that he welcomed with a relaxed smile. Lucia watched us, as if waiting for a signal from me. "Okay," I said finally, breaking the silence. "Let's move forward, but let's do it together." Lucia slowly approached Paolo, placing a hand on his face and looking into his eyes with a delicacy that seemed almost unreal. I remained there, motionless, torn between the desire to find out what would happen and the fear of completely losing control of the situation. Paolo finally seemed to abandon all hesitation, leaning towards Lucia and kissing her with a tenderness that surprised me. It was in that instant that I knew I had crossed a line that I could never cross backwards. The scene that unfolded before my eyes was like a dance, fluid and full of complicity. Lucia and Paolo seemed to move with a naturalness that surprised me, but there was one detail that reassured me. I didn't feel excluded. Lucia, with attentive gestures and meaningful looks, involved me, and Paolo did nothing without first looking for a sign of approval in my eyes. I realized that despite my fears, a part of me felt a strange kind of excitement at seeing my husband with her. It was like I was exploring a side of myself that I had never known. Yet every now and then, an uncomfortable thought crept into my mind. What if all this had changed something between us? As the evening continued, the line between what was acceptable and what made me uncomfortable became increasingly blurred. Lucia was incredibly good at maintaining her balance. His every gesture seemed designed to be neither intrusive nor out of place, and he constantly made sure I was comfortable. This way of doing things gave me the strength to carry on, even if inside me a voice kept asking me if we were doing the right thing. Paolo, for his part, seemed more and more relaxed, as if he had finally accepted the situation and was trying to enjoy it. However, I still noticed a hint of hesitation in his eyes, a sign of respect and concern for my feelings. It was as if he wanted to make sure that nothing would hurt our relationship. The following morning, the house was shrouded in surreal silence. Lucia had slept in the guest room, while Paolo and I hadn't slept a wink. Although everything had apparently gone well, a sense of unease hung in the air, almost palpable. Paolo got up early to make coffee, and I joined him in the kitchen, still in my pajamas. "How do you feel?" I asked him, trying to read his expression. He turned to me with a serious but serene look. "I don't know," he replied after a pause. "It was intense, but I want you to know that for me, Lucia is nothing more than she is. You're the only one that matters." Those words struck me, but they also made me reflect. Lucia wasn't the problem so much as what this experience could mean for our relationship. We had opened a door that could no longer be closed, and now we had to face the consequences. Shortly afterwards, Lucia joined us in the kitchen, still in her dressing gown. She looked incredibly peaceful, as if nothing had changed. "Thank you for last night," he said with a warm smile. "It was interesting." Paolo and I exchanged a look, unsure how to respond. For Lucia, it seemed to have been a simple game, but for us it was something much more complex, something that was already leaving deep traces. In the following days, Paolo and I talked a lot about what had happened. We both agreed that, in a way, the experience had brought us closer. We had shared something new, explored unknown territory together. But we also understood that it wasn't something we wanted to repeat. As emotionally charged as the evening had been, its implications were too much to handle. Lucia, on the other hand, seemed to have dismissed everything as a simple adventure. He kept calling me and acting like nothing had happened, which made me feel relieved. Our relationship as sisters remained intact, and that was what mattered most to me. As time passed, I began to see that evening as an unusual and intense chapter in our married life, an experiment that allowed us to discover new sides of ourselves. However, I also learned an important lesson. Some doors, once opened, reveal complexities and risks that are difficult to predict, and perhaps deep down some fantasies are destined to remain such.